Corey, I've got a question for you, and then we'll segue to maybe something that we should do a little bit more often is go to viewer comments from the week and maybe select some of our favorite viewer comments. But this comment is somewhat representative of the entire, not the entire fan base, of a portion of the fan base. So before we get to that, you mentioned during your rant that you expect this offense, or not necessarily expect, but you believe that there's an opportunity for it to be functional, productive. In your eyes, what does that look like on the reasonable high end for Iowa the rest of the year?
Well, I made that comment preseason. What I said a few minutes ago was I think they'll be better than they are now. I think they'll, I don't know what that looks like from a numbers perspective. Kirk Ferentz will tell you he doesn't care about the stats, and he's talked about not caring about total offense. And he emphasized that again today. Their main priority is winning. I understand. But when you have all these stats, they're all reflections of, how bad Iowa's offense has been. And I can read you. Do you want me to read you some of these stats, Mark?
Let me make one statement. Winning is why these football programs make so much money and people come to the stadium and watch on TV and all that. Yes, it's bottom line about winning. There are a lot of other periphery things that are great. We want the players to graduate, have productive lives, blah, 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 all that sort of thing. But yes, the reason there's so much money involved is because these coaches are paid to win. But at the same time, the way in which you win or lose also forbids what it's going to look like in the future. So if Kirk Ferentz was sitting right here, he could not convince me. And if he did, then I just wouldn't know where his head is because he knows so much more about football than I do, that he wouldn't feel better or have a more optimistic outlook today if they would have lost that game, not 31-0, 31-28 with 400 yards of total offense. Like he wouldn't have a different perspective on the status of their team right now. That's ridiculous. If they lost a barn burner to Penn State on the road on a last second field goal, 31-28, so the defense was statistically the same, that he wouldn't have a different view on his football team.
I do think his stance, his doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on his stance of complementary football, which Iowa we know doesn't play complementary football, but he likes to say that they do, and that's how they win games. They don't care about stats. Part of that is his philosophy and how he's always coached, Mark, but that's been exacerbated or increased, elevated due to how bad the offense has been and his need to figure out a way to defend it. So it's been exacerbated because of that. And I've seen a lot of criticism over the past few days about Kirk, and I mentioned that segment that I posted here on the channel earlier today about Ferentz fatigue. And I've heard more and more people say this, and the people have been saying this for a long time, but they're ready to move on from Kirk. I had somebody that called in on Saturday during the postgame show that said, I love Kirk. Great man. He's done so much for this program. Just love the guy. He's a great dude, and I agree with that. But I'm ready to move on. And I respect that take. I absolutely respect that take. And I'm not going to comment at this moment how I feel about the situation. To me, that's a conversation that we can have more openly at the end of the year. But I understand. I'll just say I understand where people are coming from when they say that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. All good things come to an end. All good coaches' tenures come to an end eventually. He's the longest tenured coach in the FBS. He's been here forever. The offense is in a precarious situation. I don't know how Brian makes that 25-point per game mark. I really don't, because he's at 20. What is he at? 21.3 or something like that. And they better put up a lot of points this weekend against Michigan State, because that's probably the worst defense left on the schedule, frankly. That's probably the worst defense left on the schedule. Now, they better be scoring points this weekend. I don't know how they possibly make that mark. And so then the question becomes, what happens when they don't? What happens when they don't? And I don't think we're having that conversation enough. Maybe it's premature to have that conversation because we're 4 games in. But what happens when they don't? Because Gary Barta is no longer there. He's the one who released that measure publicly. Beth Getz is the interim AD. What happens to Brian when he's no longer, because it's not just about that bonus, Mark. It talked that contract stipulation said that his contract would not be the current contract would not be renewed. So that doesn't explicitly say he's going to be fired, but it does give the implication to people that he's at risk of not continuing as the OC. So I don't have an answer for you. I think either way, if somehow Kirk gets Brian to stay another year, or Brian gets Kirk to let him stay another, whatever happens there, I just can't imagine next year and the years to come being like they have in the last 3 years, where you're still winning 8 to 10 games a year in spite of historically bad offenses. You're just not going to be able to get away with that. Mark, you know this. Like before the season started, we got that news about conference realignment in Oregon and Washington, USC. Have you seen these offenses? Like, it actually
Oh,
makes me laugh.
believe
It makes
me.
me happy. It makes me giggly, goofy, because I'm actually excited because I understand that next year, no matter what, the enabling cannot continue. It can't. It cannot continue next year and in the years to come. Because guess what? Oregon 8, they're not a doormat of the Pac-12. Washington's really good. I mean, they just blew out the team Iowa was playing this weekend by like 40. And that game was in East Lansing, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Oregon just, they just squashed Colorado over the weekend, which I was not shocked by. And then USC, talk about offense behind Lincoln Riley. Of course, Caleb Williams will be gone, but still, I mean, it's just, they're not going to be able to get away with it. And then you add in the fact that they're going to have to play those East opponents even more: Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. What's going to happen? Where are you going to run? Where are you
Can't
going to
wait
hide?
to see next year's schedule. It's going to be, and of course,
Yeah.
you don't play all of them, but you will play
But every year
roughly.
you're going to play some of them.
Oh, absolutely. If you
Multiple ones.
consider Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and the four schools or say the three schools you just mentioned from the Pac-12, those six to be the elite,
UCLA's
they're
in the
no joke.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you consider those the six that you would want to avoid, you're going to see three of them on average, 3 to 4 of them on average, instead of seeing maybe one from the other division.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
has been,
exactly.
the
Which is what they have
schedule
this year.
just goes like that.
Which is what they have this year, and then it's the second year for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, and I still have not lost confidence in Matt Rule getting it done at Nebraska. We're 4 games
Yeah.
into his tenure. Like, all these things are going to be. Heck, Purdue's shown some life. I mean, they haven't looked great, but first year head coach there as well. I mean, we've talked about it. Northwestern's going to have a first year head coach.
Purdue played the kind of non-conference schedule it would have been interesting to see Iowa play.
Well, Virginia Tech's horrible.
They're horrible. Yes, they are. But Fresno State, some teams with some life to them. It would have been just interesting. Syracuse.
So you just don't think Utah State has any life? Is that what you're telling me?
I have not kept up with Utah State. I don't know what they did last. Well, they played Air Force, right?
What
Played
day was that?
That might have been the week before. Anyway, we appreciate Thor, your contribution. Thank you so much for that. Do you think that BF has such an ego as a tight end guru that he focuses the game plan around them and ignores the wide receivers? Well, that would be foolish if that is his tact. I can't imagine.
That's not what it is.
He should be, if he has an ego, his ego would be that we have a top offense and we're producing points and yardage and people are patting me on the back. I think that would be the incentive.
Nobody is patting Brian Ferentz on the back for having 8 times the amount of targets to his tight ends and his receivers. Nobody. Okay. If anything, he should be looking for it. If anything, if he's trying to feed the ego and pat himself on the back, Mark, he's labeled as the quarterback's coach. Wouldn't you want to do everything you can to produce big numbers for your quarterback? Not 5 for 14 for 42 yards. By the way, Utah State lost to James Madison over the weekend at home. A 7-point win for James Madison. James Madison's a good program. Beat Virginia, beat Troy. So I don't know. Verdict's out on Utah State, but they are 1-3. I'll give you that. They're 1-3. They've lost to 3 probably good teams, but yeah, we'll see. They got UConn this weekend, and they get Colorado State. Well,
if it's not going to help things to change coaches, then it doesn't matter who's coaching.
I thought it was an interesting comment, but by who or the question. I can't remember who the media member, and I'd be happy to give them a plug. I can't remember who the media member was, but whoever asked that question about play caller change, like I don't think that's going to happen, but it is something that I haven't really considered here so far this year. Like other teams have made play calling changes during the season. So in other words, Brian could literally just not be fired, but he could just be relieved of his duties. Would he have to eat a slice of humble pie? Sure. Would the media find out? Would the public need to know? Probably would. Um, I guess I don't know the answer to that question, but that is an interesting topic. Is there anybody on the staff that could take over play calling duties if push came to shove? If Ferentz was willing, if Kirk was willing to accept that, which I don't think he is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's anybody on the staff right now that you trust. Ken O'Keefe is not part of the full time staff, and Kelton Copeland's a former quarterback, but I sure wouldn't give those duties to him for for anything. He's never done it.
I know that this offense is criticized for being archaic, and I often have said that I believe play calling is generally overrated, but it is important. So I sometimes get misquoted in saying that it's not important. It is important.
I think it's one of
Obviously,
Iowa's. I think it's one of Iowa's biggest issues, Mark. I think it's one of Iowa's biggest issues is their play calling.
I got to think there's a player development issue as well.
I'm not saying that's not an issue, but I don't. You can't convince me for a second that Charlie Jones was developed to that extent when he got over to Purdue in 2 months. Remember, he transferred over there in June, and all
Well,
of a
they
sudden
run a
he's showing out.
completely different style of offense.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
style and play calling. That's what I'm saying. Those two things. And Jeff Brom is a tremendous play caller. He's known as a tremendous play caller. And yes, his scheme is set up, his offense is set up to produce stats for his receivers. I get that. But that's what I'm saying. I think, yeah, player development might be a problem, but I don't think it's for lack of talent. I just, they've got some talent at wide receiver. I think Regani's a talented receiver. I think Seth Anderson, Caleb Brown is talented. They got really talented tight ends. I think they got really talented running backs. Now, maybe their offensive line isn't quite as talented as it should be, which is sad when you think about the fact that Iowa's got offensive line gurus out the wazoo on this staff. I don't know about that either. I'm no line guru, but I almost think the claims that hey, it's the scheme and it's they've ran a little bit more gap this year in the run game than in past seasons, but I don't know. You're grasping at straws trying to figure out what the common denominator is when you have all these different players producing the same results year after year on offense.
Yeah, the only team in the Big Ten that I can think of that runs a similar style of offense and has a similar, nobody has it to their degree, but a similar style of offense that's effective is Michigan.
Yeah, but the difference is Michigan has elite talent.
So I was just curious, something we can never answer. If Michigan was running the same exact plays as Iowa.
All I know is and I'm not the only one who made this comment, but it just seemed, and I've had several people reach out to me and say this. It seemed like on Saturday, one of Iowa's issues that they have is the first couple drives seem to be well orchestrated, like they're scripted out, and there's nothing wrong with that. It seems to be working. And then after that, it's like Brian's drawing plays out of a hat. I mean, that's seriously how it feels. And what's odd about it is maybe we haven't noticed such a stark pattern as we have this year. But Mark, think to Saturday against Penn State. First drive, they moved the ball a little bit. Second drive, they moved the ball a little bit before the fumble. Those were those two drives were their most effective drives. If there were any drives in the game, they were moving the ball decently well in those first two drives. And then it went away. Go back to the Utah State game. Second play from scrimmage. Deep ball to Seth Anderson. Second drive, they scored a touchdown. Can't do anything after that. I think they scored, one touchdown late. You look at the Iowa State game. Same thing. They had it going early, and then, you get the 59-yard run by Jazz Patterson, and they got things going, and then they just completely stall out the rest of the game. That's a pattern. That's become a pattern. And it does feel like maybe things are scripted out for the first couple of drives, and then it's just like we go right back to not having any idea what we're doing with play calling.
It could be that. It could also be that defensive coordinators are adjusting, and Iowa has no ability to adjust
But
back.
there were some plays called, like, on Saturday. I think there was was there a tunnel screen played Saturday, called Saturday? It was a interesting little shovel pass to Eric All on one of the first 2 drives that produced big yardage, stuff like that. Now, I understand when you get behind the 8 ball, when the score and the defense can tee off on you, it's going to make things a lot harder for a team like Iowa. But I'm just saying, like, those are the types of plays that seem like Iowa executes on the first couple of drives, and then we don't even see them attempt those plays. I mean, I go back to the Michigan game, the Big Ten championship game in 2021. Mark, remember the halfback pass? Remember how we made that comment
Mhm.
the first drive? It was like, oh wow, look at that. They tried a halfback pass. Look at Brian. He's got stuff up his sleeve. We didn't see another innovative play the rest of the game. I just don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing those on the first drive or two and then they disappear. But that also is an indication to me that we have the ability to throw a couple of unique plays out early. But if we don't understand how to call plays based on flow in a game and based on what the defense is doing, we're in trouble. And that's what we've experienced here the start of the season on offense.
Yeah, there are a ton of components involved in calling a game effectively. One would be understanding your personnel, who does what well. Let's say, for example, your offensive line is not strong at pass protection. Well, you got to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands to protect your offensive line and not get your quarterback beat up. So that's only one of a zillion examples. Your guards aren't effective pulling. They're not quick enough to get where they need to get. So you may like to trap and pull, but you can't do it. Or you need to pick your spots. So there's that understanding of what your personnel can do well and what they can't do well. There's also, you should have been able to scout the other team to know where their strengths and weaknesses lie. And then you should be able to self scout to know, okay, how are they going to play us? Are we obvious? Have we been predictable? Well, we need to break tendencies.
And I don't think we do any of that, Mark. And I say we, I'm not, I don't think the offensive coaching staff does any of that. And that falls on Brian. He's a play caller. He's a QB's coach. He's the OC.